Okay, now we're recording.
So a couple things I wanted to say, first of all, is I've talked with a few folks about the first, because there are about half of you that are about halfway through the program now. And I kind of did a review with a few of you. I've not gotten with everybody yet. I will. But one of the things that was brought up by a few folks was, is there a way to go back to pharmacy for a little bit? I know we did a deep dive. I know we have a lot of depth. But is there a way to take a look? Here we go. I think this is it. Are you seeing?
Screen sharing, yep.
Prism Health Strategists.
There we go, yep.
Okay. So I talked to Ryan Rice today and just asked him, basically, this is based on input from, I know at least Andy and Brett, and it was peripherally from Kelly Early, but we haven't talked recently. But what Andy and Brett brought up was, if we could just do it one more time, just basically go through the pharmaceutical industry basics, the product flow, money flow, terminology, revenue generating tactics, and really what Andy and Brett both said, what are the contractual elements, because when Contorno starts throwing language around and we don't really know what he's talking about, I really want to understand that. And he has a lot of experience with PBMs in the industry. He's working now with, he's going to take a look at some of Terry's data. I'm going to talk to her about it. And then the other thing was, how do you work pharmaceutical carve-outs? Because sometimes that's not such an easy thing to do, especially if you're in an ASO model or fully insured. So I'm going to get some information from Ryan about when he's going to be available, and then send some information to you all. Maybe have a 1 hour to 2 hour class on that, and just start from the basics and go through. I think it's, based on the folks I've talked to, that was the one thing we wish we would have had more time for things to sink in. Does that sound like something that anybody else would be interested in?
Definitely. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. And I think, as you know, I've tried to make this program as practical as possible, and real data and real results and changes. And Lee is one of the few professors around that's actually had his foot in the commercial world and academia. So I thought it was good. We've taught project management to the city together at one point, and but I think he's aware of the challenges of change management and has done a lot of teaching in that area. So I'm glad to have Lee here. Thanks. Lee. As you know, we have folks that are directors of human resources and total rewards. We have CFOs, we have benefits advisors, we have company owners. So they're all over it.
All right.
I know in your class as MBA, they're kind of slackers, but these people are all over
gotcha.
it. So I want you to know that.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Okay. It's all yours.
All right. So let's go to Moodle page real quick. All right. So on our Moodle page, we have a course syllabus, and you can see there's a number of assignments that are in there and how we'll grade the course, which the younger students are always really concerned about. So we broke it up by dates of the meeting. So we'll be meeting every Tuesday night for 5 weeks. We are going to review the first 2 nights. We're going to review sort of the fundamentals of management and some change management and organizational control. The third night, we're going to get into more change management with Cotter. I don't know why that just jumped on me. Keeps jumping for some reason. And then we're going to discuss some more related articles. Kind of the big assignment in here early on. Something is happening. It keeps jumping. Screen something. Tonight. Well, let me go to tonight's homework. First of all, is just write a short reflective narrative about these different topics we're going to go through tonight. And it says in here. Let me read through it real quick so everybody understands tonight's assignment. So please write a reflective narrative for this section. The 3 most important takeaways you have, and how the topics relate to your work, and explain why it's important to you. The length of the assignment is about one page double space per idea for 3 space total, right? So the topics we're going to go through tonight, right? Think about the 3 things that really resonate with you and just write a quick one-page double-spaced on about why that idea is important to you, how it affects your work, your thoughts about management, your thoughts about business, and so forth. And then with the way that works in Moodle, then you go ahead and just, if you haven't done this before in Moodle, you just click on this, and it gives you a cue to drop your file into that. And I do not know why this keeps changing up. And then the next week, we're going to do sort of the same thing with other thoughts about management, and then we'll jump more into change management and organizational design. The idea is, if you're not a business major, and I suspect some of you aren't, you really haven't had a class in management and organizational design before, so we need to talk about how that works before we can talk about changing it. Right? So by the middle of the class, or by 2 weeks from now, we'll really dive into that much deeper, and we'll talk about as that really pertains to the healthcare industry or changing an organization's healthcare benefits. And I've been looking for lots of comments and real-world experiences from you guys, the members of the class.
Is this on Moodle currently, Lee?
What's that?
Is this already posted on the Moodle currently?
Yes, yes.
What's it under? Because I'm on the Moodle and I don't see it.
These are the PowerPoint. See where it says September 3rd?
You didn't pay your bill, Andy.
I paid my bill.
You're on HBD 633.
Let me look. Let me see.
Wow.
Does everybody else see it?
Yeah, I see it.
Cohort 1.
Yeah, look under fall 2019. The class is there, and then it should be under there, HBD 633.
I don't have it, but I can try to connect with somebody later then.
When you look, well, yeah, give it a good look, and if you can't find it, send me an email, because I thought I had everybody added to the class, but maybe you're not added to the class. When you add the course here at Lynchburg, it doesn't add you to Moodle. We have to do that manually. So
Yeah, I don't have it.
okay, I'll double check it. I'll get you added to the class.
Not a problem at all.
Okay.
He is added to Moodle.
I don't know why you're not seeing it then. I don't know. We'll have to dig into it. If not, I can send you the files we're looking at right now. So tonight, we're just kind of go through these thoughts about management and how it's taught in the textbooks, and we can discuss among ourselves. Feel free to chime in anytime about what you agree, don't agree with, have questions about, have seen. How, in your experience, it sort of brings a lot to the conversation when you do. So we'll talk kind of about, we have, 4 different articles to go through here. And I'm going to go fairly rapidly because this is pretty elemental stuff in terms of management. So the first one is about just what is management, and we take it right from the start. So basically the textbook definition is planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. That's what management's all about. And what are we doing? We're controlling humans and other resources to achieve organizational goals effectively and efficiently. And that's basically what management is trying to do. Keep things organized so we can achieve whatever goals the organization is doing, and effectively and efficiently. And we'll define those terms in a second here, right? So an organization, right, collection of people who work together, right? And it's management job to coordinate those activities, right? The managers are the people who do that in management, basically, right? And the whole idea is to get the most performance we can out of the organization, both effectively and efficiently, right? And the difference in those terms, right, kind of help to understand. Come on now. Okay. Efficiency is what you think of efficiency as an efficient car getting the most mileage out of a gallon of gas. And we think of an efficient organization as doing things the right way, doing things the best way to get the maximum output out of our inputs, versus effectiveness is working on the right things, doing the right things. So for instance, you might see an organization that's working hard on doing the wrong things, and that would be a lack of effectiveness. They might even be doing very efficient at it, but it'd be lack of effectiveness. So we're not just making sure we're doing things smart, but we got to do the smart things, right? So when I say down here, we do things the right way or do the right things, right? So that's part of sort of the fundamentals of management. Yeah.
Did you want us to be seeing the slideshow? Because we're not.
You're not. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Mine says I'm sharing it, and you should be seeing it. I guess
I'm seeing the syllabus.
Okay. Let me bring this up.
There you go.
There you got it? Okay.
Yep.
So I'll just back up a little bit. So there's the definition of manage I just went through, organizations, managers. mentioned organizational performance. And here's where we are, efficiency and effectiveness. Okay. All right, thanks for telling me. All right, and again, management is all about planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. So here's what planning is: identifying, selecting appropriate goals of action. And again, I'll keep these posted on Moodle. So if you want to go back and reference them, you want to look something up, you have questions for it in a week or two, that's perfectly fine to go back and bring up questions about how things work. Right? So it's management's job to select appropriate goals and courses of actions. Right? That doesn't mean the rank and file people can't suggest things, but it's manager's job to choose them. Right? So in the planning process, we decide what goals to pursue, how to pursue them, then we allocate resources to that. Right? And that's why we all have to go upstairs for approval when it comes to spend money on different things. We have to get approval from upper management on what we're going to spend money on or what resources we're going to use. Right? And since we talk about organizational design, organizing is structuring these working relationships so the organization can do what it's supposed to do. And we'll talk more about that later. But typically when we organize, you see things like this: an organizational structure that looks like the good old-fashioned org chart. Right? And we'll talk about different types of organizational design in here and what they're geared to do, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and how they might accomplish the organizational goals. There are a number of key differences from the different organizational structures. Right. So managers are planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. So the leading part, right? There's lots of definition for leading. I did my dissertation on different styles of leaders and different styles of organizational cultures. The definition I like of leadership is influence others to achieve goals. Some of the textbooks say to achieve organizational goals, but it's been my experience they don't always try to achieve organizational goals. Sometimes they have their own goals in mind. But leaders influence others. And the other might be one person, it might be many thousands, but they achieve others to achieve some type of goals. They influence others. If the people were going to do it anyway, you're really not influencing them. But if we have time, we're going to do we're going to do a module on leadership, just to kind of give you some thoughts on leadership. Right? This is sort of a management type master's program, and it'd be nice to talk about different styles of different styles of leadership to give you some thoughts on that. Certainly leadership is one of those fields that's, it's huge. It's a little vague. It's hard to tell exactly where it starts and ends. And so we'll get to that later, about 2 nights from now. All right, so again, we're talking about planning, organizing, leading, and controlling, right? So in the controlling part, that's where managers monitor activity and see how things are going, right? So it's how well an organization is achieving its goals, so it's in real time while the organization is working, and taking actions, should say, as required to maintain or improve performance. So that's when the management is checking on what's going on and are things going okay or not, right? So in management is checking people constantly on status reports, financial statements, all of that. That's what this is, right? This is this task of checking how things are going, and then they have to decide if things are going well enough or they need to step in and take some type of action. And the outcome of the control process is the ability, we're going to measure performance, right? And that helps us regulate efficiency and effectiveness. So did we pick the right goals? Did we decide on the right ways to achieve those goals? Right? Do we put the right people on it? How are things going? Are we getting the results we had hoped for? If not, should we be doing something? Right? So all these kind of manager reviews you see taking place, right, are part of the controlling process. Right? So interesting in that, all right, so we have lots more first-line managers, obviously, than CEOs. And as you go up the rank, as you go up the pyramid here, managers have somewhat different tasks. So we see the first level, the first line managers spend a lot of time leading because they have teams to lead and teams that need a lot of leadership because they're not as skilled and not as well trained. Middle managers do less leading but more planning. You get to the top of the rung, right? Top managers do more planning and less leading. Right? But they tend to do more controlling because they're the ones who are monitoring performance because they're responsible for the performance of the organization. So the first line managers spend a lot of time doing, and the top managers will actually spend more time either controlling what's going on or planning what's going to go on in the future. Although there's a lot of evidence to indicate they don't spend as much time planning as people think because they're so busy with the day-to-day stuff that comes up. Just the standard entropy that comes up in a business day. They spend a lot of time being the roles like the figurehead and the mouthpiece of the organization to the public and representing stockholders' interests. Okay, so that Some of the skills we see out of managers are typically, it's useful to have a lot of conceptual skills in terms of diagnose situations, analytical skills, those things. So that's certainly not true of all CEOs. They tend to have a lot of human skills, and that managers can understand those around them and interact with those around them. And they also have technical skills for the specific role they're in. Most recruiters will tell you, of those three categories, which of those three categories you think is the easiest to teach for people who are trying to grow in the management? Technical, absolutely, right? And that's kind of what we do in the School of Business when we train accountants and we train people, right? But certainly the human skills and the conceptual skills take a long time to develop, if ever, right? So we try to work with our students a lot on planning those type skills. And I don't know what's going on. This thing's jumping around on me. But we spend a lot of time trying to develop those conceptual thinking skills and those human interaction skills in our people, right? And we probably can all think of managers who are a little light in one of those three areas. And certainly what we mean by technical skills, right? That's their core competency of whatever it is they're trying to manage. They understand and know the thing they're trying to manage. And yeah, I agree. Those are the easiest skills to teach. Although that's what people seem to be most proud of. So that's kind of the fundamental, that's the end of it. That's kind of the fundamental thoughts on the definition of management. And what's the classical definition again? What do they do? Planning, organizing, leading, and controlling the organization, right? And then they take action to make changes. And that's what we're going to be talking about in here before too long, is how to take action. Let me find the controlling step. If they don't like what's going on, or they do the planning for the future, and if they don't like what's going on controlling, how well an organization is achieving its goals and taking action to maintain or improve performance, right? So that's part of management's job, certainly, to do that. Okay, so that's all I wanted to get to first part for the first definition of management. Let me shut that down. Let me see if I can get to the right. All right, so the first person who designed, all right.
Lee, I'm going to ask one question if I can.
Go ahead. Yep.
So you saw your hierarchy there with the CEO and the management and the hourly. So at what level are you all connecting generally when you go in?
Good question. Are you talking to the C-suite or?
Yeah, so as a benefit advisor, I think we aim to talk to the C-suite, because ultimately, usually the decision falls with them.
Yeah.
We might sometimes have to start with the HR director, but usually it's the CFO at least that we need to get in front of.
Yeah, at some point, right? Are you working your way up or down in the organization?
Try to work our way down and start from the top if we can. Depends on relationships usually.
Yeah, I would agree. It's much easier to start that way, although often you have to start lower levels and work your way up.
Right.
Right. I would very much agree with that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would say if it's a true cold call, the 9 out of 10 times they connect us to the HR director, whether we ask for them or not. So
yeah.
I stopped asking for who handles that, and I just ask for the CFO, just because I think that this business is changing so much. Just the monetary aspect of it, we have to get them involved way earlier than we used to, when the HR director was the main person we would call on.
Yeah, that sounds like.
This is Kelly. This is Kelly, who sits in the HR seat. So I would say it depends on the organization and the decision-making structure. In our organization, I'm making that decision. So I'm speaking to the CFO and the CEO, and that's how you get in, is through me. So very rarely would someone in the advisor seat be sitting in front of the CFO or the CEO at my company.
Gotcha.
It's interesting is Kelly's become painfully aware she's a little bit unique in the HR realm that most folks don't have the analytical background, first of all, but also the authority where she is, that she's been in operations and she has an analytical background. She knows something about healthcare, but in general, a lot of the advisors are not seeing that in human resources at all. So it's pretty interesting, the varying experience with HR.
And Tom, this Robson, I'd agree with Kelly. I mean, I think that some of my biggest cases have been signed up through the HR department. Of course, they've communicated to their other executives, but I think there is that hierarchy that if they're reporting directly to the CEO, they have the ability to make these types of big decisions, either by themselves or as a committee. So.
Okay.
I would say that we agree with Robson and Kelly. We don't normally deal with the CFO or the CEOs. We deal with the HR, and they do a great job of making sure that they can give us the information that we need. So I agree with them.
Okay. Certainly reporting structures are, we're going to talk about these next slides, but certainly reporting structures are very important to understand. I used to be an engineering manager. I know when we bought equipment and such, the first thing the vendors wanted to know is who's the decision making here, right? Who's going to make this call whether you're going to buy these things or not? And certainly that was part of it. Okay, so we've talked about sort of the rudimentary fundamental decisions of management. And now we're going to talk about a guy named Henri Fayol, who sort of invented the whole idea of studying management. So Henri Fayol is a French engineer who was running an engineering company. Actually, he worked for an engineering company, and he was sent to shut down a mine because it was inefficient. And instead of shutting it down, when he got there, he said that we could do this. So he turned the mine around. He got better management in there, and he kept the mine going. Everybody kept their jobs. The company made money. It was a good success story. And then as he retired, he began to publish works about management. And why don't we, the managers, get together and share our information about management and study it and figure out how to do a good job? So so this was quite a while ago. So in the 1880s, right, he became a director of his mining company. But not until he retired in 2016 did he publish his book in French. And then by 1949, way after World War II, it was finally translated to English. And it's the General Industrial Management is the name of his book. And it's kind of the first real book about management from if you go back to 1916 of general management type things. So some of the things he talked about or how he got his information, he basically built his own personal information of what worked and didn't work in the mining industry. He thought there's a lot of principles there that could be applied everywhere. Right? And he didn't say, this is the answer, I'm the solution, hire me and I'll fix all your problems like some of the people today do. He just said, I want to encourage others to build on what I've written about management. I don't have all the answers, but this is what worked for me. And I encourage other people to contribute to the school of thought, basically. So he basically started as an academic pursuit. He's credited with inventing management as a field of study. And there were basically he thought there were a consistent set of principles you could apply to most areas. And he even had 6 primary functions of management, which are on the next slide, which are forecasting, planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, controlling, which are very much like the 4 we just talked about: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling, right? So he's very similar to the current school of thought on management. He just had a few more categories that basically covered the same things. So interesting that things were so exact. So the next slide is his 14 principles of management. I kind of want to walk through these because this is like management 101 vocabulary that people in management should understand what management organizations should do and some of the terms we use for this. Many of these will be familiar to you. You may not have heard of all of these. In the following slides, what I did was I wrote a paper for an academic conference. I teach Fayol's 14 Principles of Management class, but then at some point a number of years ago, I was reading a book about the Roman army, like the old Roman army, the imperial Roman army, and about why they were so successful. And it talked about the things they did right over and over again. So they were basically the number one military force in the world for about 1,000 years, or 800 years, right? So what did they do right, and what did they do right for? It wasn't just one guy because they did it for 800 years. So what's kind of some of their secrets? How did they pull this off? I'm always kind of interested in why people are able to pull it off what they do. What was the magic combination they had? Why did the Wright brothers come up with the first airplane? I actually went to the University of Dayton, so the Wright brothers were kind of a big deal to us. And why did they do it? And what did they figure out that other people didn't? So I've always liked to figure out, what are different successful organizations' secret? By the way, with the Wright brothers, they invented the wind tunnel. Early wing design had some airs into it, and rather than try to fly with flawed wings and kill yourself, the Wright brothers invented the wind tunnel so they could test scaled wings, and that helped them do it. Besides, they had a lot of other smart things going on. But anyway, I'm going to walk through these 14 principles of management. I've designed these slides a while ago for this conference, and basically it shows the definition of these thoughts of management and how the Roman army did exactly what Henri Fayol wrote down about 1,000 years later. right? So for instance, Henri Fayol talked about division of work, right? And everybody has their specialty because they're more efficient when they have a specialty. And certainly the Roman armies, they had guys they called artillery who did all the catapults and flingers and anything that would hurl things at the enemy and enemy cities. They had specialized cavalry that had specialized things, where a lot of their forces were these guys down here in the lower right. They were just sort of the barbarian hordes, right? So and they also had a lot of logistic supply chains that the other organizations did not invest in. Interesting from a organizational accomplishment standpoint, Julius Caesar went up to Germany. He stopped by the Rhine River. He was the first to build, that we know of, to build a bridge across the Rhine River. He built a 1,000-foot long wooden bridge over 30 feet deep water to move his 40,000 person army across the river. How long did it take him? 10 days. Right. So if you know anything about engineering and construction, right, that is an astounding fact. So they could really accomplish unbelievable things. Of course, when you got 40,000 guys working on something, I guess you can get a lot of work done in a short period of time. But to me, that's just an astounding feat of construction. So they could do a lot of things by organizing their military so well. Authority, right? One of the 14 principles is authority, which is as management increases, so the level of authority. That's kind of clear in today's organizations, but it wasn't always the case. People were kind of overstepping their bounds a lot in the old days, and it sort of depended on what family you were from, who you were related to. If you had an uncle who was a general, you could cause a lot of damage as a lieutenant, that kind of stuff. So the idea that authority is what their position in the organization gives them authority, and that's what gives them the right to give orders. This standard over here, this is some of the things. There's the Legion Eagle and the name of the Legion, and this is what some of the things that give them, that signifies who they are, carrying these type of things, right? Every organization should have some discipline, and discipline is employees must obey the rules and respect the rules of the organization. Things like now we have safety rules, sexual harassment rules, lots of rules. The employees need a clear understanding of the rules and a clear understanding of what happens when you don't follow the rules. The reason effective leadership is on the number 2 bulletin here. Number 2 bullet is when you have discipline problems in an organization, it's been linked over and over again to the leadership, right? It all falls back on the leadership. Poor discipline means poor leadership, and that's sort of a standard that we teach when we teach about leadership and management. To give you an idea how the Roman army worked, if you ever heard the word they were decimated, right? Decimate actually is a numerical term where they would, if a unit retreated in combat and they were deemed to be cowards on the field because they didn't hold their ground, you can't kill all your soldiers because then you won't have an army. So they would kill 1 out of 10. They would draw lots to see who was going to be going. As a penalty, the other 9 had to beat them to death, which would be a horrible thing, right? You have to beat your comrades to death. But that's what they did to discourage these guys from not doing their duty, right? So they had a lot of really serious punishments for things. These are all capital crimes. By the way, if you were one of the survivors of decimation, they made you eat barley, which is horse food. That'd be the current equivalent of making somebody eat canned dog food. And they made you sleep outside the camp where it was dangerous and you weren't part of the army. Other capital crimes: leave your post out of fear, throwing away your weapons, falling asleep on watch, all that kind of stuff. So lots of things you could do to get in trouble and be punished. Unity of command is the term you hear in management. Every employee should only receive orders from one supervisor. I think one of these nights we're going to talk about a matrix organization, which means you have 2 bosses, which violates this rule. But everybody should have 1 boss and only 1 boss, right? You need at least 1 boss and the maximum 1 boss, right? Anybody worked with more than 1 boss? Yeah, Kelly? Yeah? How'd that work out?
Still is. That's what Framatome is, right?
The big matrix organization?
Yeah, so we're a very matrix organization because we are French owned. So we have a French boss and we have a U.S. boss. Yeah.
Sounds great. Sometimes you see this in small businesses. If it's a married couple owns a business, right? I know my wife worked at a place where the wife was in charge, and then when she left, the husband was in charge. And then he changed what she said until she got back, and then it would change back. Kind of this game they played back and forth.
That's what the late checks say goes on in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Alicia's boss until she leaves, and then Joe's boss.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Backwards, Joe.
Yeah, it's backwards, definitely.
Yeah. Anybody work in an organization with no boss? Nobody?
Joe.
Yeah. There you go.
Me, I'm the boss.
There you go. Way to speak up. I've heard of people in the corporate world for some reason not have a boss for a while. And I remember I had a boss I left and we had a sort of an interim manager who really his heart was in a different area. He was only going to be there a few months. And it's not very good. You don't have anybody to protect you. There's nobody to do your evaluations. It's difficult to get credit for anything you do. It's not as fun as you think it might be. Right? You just basically tread water, wait until the next person gets there. So unity of command, every employee should have one boss, right? That's the unity. So you get orders from one place. And the Romans, certainly a military organization, knew exactly who belonged to what group, who was in charge of what, and how it worked. By the way, this guy over here on the right is a centurion, and you know that because his headdress on his hat goes from side to side, right? That means he's a centurion. This is a officer's helmet. You know he's an officer because his headdress goes front to back. He's got the chicken crown comb, right? It's a comb on a chicken. He's got the chicken comb up there. All right, so we had unity of command. This is unity of direction. Each group of organizational activities with the same objective should be directed by one manager using one plan. So we're going to decide what to do, and we're all going to support that decision to do that. So once we pick a direction, that's it. We're going to argue and discuss and fight it out. But once we pick a direction, everybody needs to get behind that decision and go for it.
Did you and Brett work that out? That's amazing.
What?
You see Brett's headdress there? Clearly he's in management.
Oh, no.
Just
I can't see it because I see the slide bigger.
Haven't had a use for this in 3 years until now.
Oh, Brett. That's fantastic. It looks just like it. It has the same gold trim and everywhere.
Yeah, I think we must buy on the same eBay seller.
Yeah. Actually, I don't own one. That's amazing. So being an engineer, I looked up some of the features of this helmet. These chin straps, Brett can demonstrate the chin straps are mobile, right? So they give you freedom of your head. You're not pinched in a helmet too tightly. The thing on your forehead is not just to keep the rain off your forehead, but that's so when somebody hits you on the noggin, on top of the head, it doesn't slide down and cut your nose off. The guards over the ears are for the same reason. Your ears are protected hanging out of there. And the thing on the back isn't to keep the rain off your neck, although it probably helps with that. It turns out when humans, the design of this was analyzed, when humans get swung at from the top, they automatically hunch their shoulders up to their back. So when you do that, that flap connects with the armor on your back, and there's no open neck for you to get hurt on the back of the neck. Right. So there's actually a ton of thought went into all the little things on this. I can't believe you had that, Brett. That's pretty cool. So I got to ask, do you have the rest of it? The helmet?
No, you only need so many things for game day.
Yeah. All right. You got the most important piece.
Yeah.
All right. So that's unity of direction. When the officers pick how we're going to go, whether we like it or not, at some point, we all got to row the boat in the same direction. Subordination of individual interest to the general interest, right? And by this, we mean the interest of an employer or group of employees should not take priority over the rest of the organization as a whole. So the organization has to do well. We can't sacrifice the whole organization for one group, right? So we've got to think of the whole work, because if the whole organization doesn't succeed, then none of us can succeed. So sometimes we just got to put the organization above ourselves or some other group in the organization and do the right thing, whatever that happens to be. And so different groups have to get together so we can help each other. For instance, at one point in the Roman army, the soldiers were forbidden to marry because that would distract them from their soldierly duties. I guess like Catholic priests, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the rule was. Apparently, it wasn't very effective. So here's an example of the teamwork the Romans were known for. This round thing's called an orb. Apparently, when the enemy cavalry gets around you, they're really dangerous. So you all turn your backs to each other to stick pointy things outward and keep them all away from you. And this other one's in movies a lot. It's called the turtle, where you attack a city. You just cover yourself with shields and you march right up to the city walls, and you're rather impervious to them throwing things at you or shooting things at you. Is the idea anyway. So anyway, we need to make sure the individuals understand that the organization has to win, the organization has to succeed, so they can succeed. Remuneration. Workers must be paid a fair wages for their service. This is a guy from the 1880s writing about this. We got to pay people fair wages so we can keep them, so we can retain them. It doesn't do us any good to train people if they quit. particularly if they quit and go work for our competitors. Right? So Romans were one of the first professional armies. Before that, the way you normally did it was in early spring, you went around and hired a bunch of guys. In late spring, you would train these people to sort of be soldiers. And by summer, you'd go off and fight a couple battles, hopefully win, capture some territory. If not, you'd fall back and try to do it again next year. So the Romans were the first ones. The Greeks did it for a while, but the Romans really perfected it. Having professional soldiers, they were in for 20 years, which is a long time when you only live to be, 40, 45? So they were in for 20 years, and they had retirement, they had savings. They often paid them off in farmland. If you were an auxiliary, which meant you were from a different territory, your kids could become Roman citizens, which was the golden ticket back then. So there was a lot of they were actually pretty fairly remunerated for their effort. It wasn't just like we're going to draft them and treat them like slaves, like say the English Navy did in the 1700s. Right, so it was pretty fair with the way they paid people. Centralization. We talk about this in management a lot. Central versus decentralized management. Centralization refers to the degree to which subordinates are involved in decision making. Centralization is, of course, we all got to talk to headquarters, find out what they want to do, and then we do it. Decentralized is we push all decision making down to the lowest level. Right. They both have pluses and minuses. If we have more centralization, then we have more similar decision making throughout the whole organization, more the same. If we have less organization, sorry, go ahead. No, if we have more decentralization, then the decisions get made at the lowest level, which means they can be made a lot faster, but they may not be the same, or we may have less experienced people making them. So this is a thing that gets talked about a lot. Should organizations have lots of centralized control or not? And often it comes down to speed, right? If we're a consulting company that needs to move quick, we tend to have decentralized management. If we're a big government bureaucracy, we tend to have lots of centralized decision-making and command and control. So I know in the medical industry, there's, what would you say? More centralized or in the benefits industry, more centralized or decentralized?
Well, I guess it depends. Like, you mean actually in a consulting firm itself, like an advisory, or just the industry in general?
I think the industry in general, like the big companies, I'm sure, like Aetna and those kind of places.
I think it's driven a lot by the insurance companies. Well, I think there's one big group is providers, right? Hospital systems and hospital networks. You have insurance companies, and then you kind of have everybody else, manufacturers, right? Pharmaceutical manufacturers. Okay. Medical device manufacturers. So I think there's a lot of tribes, that are all kind of
in ARM benefits, AMR benefits, sorry, who makes the decisions there?
Me. I try.
Ryan, who makes the decisions in your place?
Can you hear me?
You can.
Okay. Yeah, so ours is kind of set up uniquely, and I think that's one of the things that differentiates us is that we hoit that we're decentralized, meaning that, for example, we're Brown & Brown Northwest, so everything's done here in Portland. However, we are actually Brown & Brown Incorporated out of Fort Lauderdale, which is the 6th largest in the world. So it's interesting how when I first saw this slide particularly, I thought of us right away, just because I think people want to try and be, a little bit of both. I've seen on both sides where I don't know. It seems like there's definitely leans at least one way or the other.
Okay. And some organizations will shift depending on what's going on, right? I used to be a defense contractor for the military, and it seems like in the U.S., you see the U.S. military is very centrally organized, but when they're in a theater like Afghanistan, then they need to be quick, so they push the decision level much down to a lower level. So a lieutenant in Afghanistan has far more power than a lieutenant in the U.S., even though they're absolutely the same rank and the same people. They're in the same place in the org chart, but just because of the mission, it's because of what's going on. So I think it very much depends on situation too, right? We adjust as we need to for things we need to do. So that one gets changed. That one gets debated a lot. You see companies switch back and forth. Seems like every 10 years, the pendulum swings back and forth which way they want to go. And I think it has to do with changing situations, and a little bit of the grass is always greener on the other side, I think. just because there's pluses and minuses to each. As soon as some lower level person makes a bad mistake, we want to centralize all the decision making, but then we get mistakes in communication and we get time lags when we miss opportunities and we make errors because of time lags and communication mistakes. So they both have problems, and if there was one right way to do it, everybody do it right. So I think that's and you'll see companies switch back and forth a lot. Depends on what they think is working for them.
Lee, I'd like to tell you about the construction industry.
Yeah.
We have decisions all up and down the world. Everybody has to make decisions, but the hardest thing is to know when you should not be making a decision and when to bring it up.
Good point.
That's our biggest decision-making challenge, and it's constant. We always have to keep redefining that.
Do you have it's harder, right? It's easier like in purchasing. You can say like you're allowed to buy things up to $5,000. More than that, you need approval and all that. But with, I guess, on the site decision, like in construction, that'd be a challenge. That'd be a big challenge.
Well, we're always making something different every day. Nothing is the same from day to day. So everybody has a lot of autonomy, and people have to, we're not in the same place either. We're all over the 100-mile radius. And so, and we've got a lot of drivers and a lot of trucks and a lot of equipment. Equipment operators make decisions all the time. So it's a constant battle about whether they should have made the decision or if they should have asked for assistance. The biggest mistakes are when they choose that incorrectly. And it's never a set. I mean, it's easy to say that, like you said, the purchasing, it's easy to set specific limits on things that happen the same way every time.
Right.
When you get out into the field and your day is different every day and your task is different every day, that's the big challenge, is to determine when you should and when you should not make the decision. Yeah.
And I can imagine there's a lot of money on stake both ways, right? Do I ask and lose time and maybe lose an opportunity? Now it rained and we can't do it. Or I'm pretty sure I know how to do this. I think I know how to do it. I'm just going to go ahead. It'll probably be okay. And 8 out of 10 times it is okay, but sometimes it isn't, right?
Yeah.
Those are always a challenge. And my advice is you can't react to one. You can't have the many pay for the sins of the few. Just because one person makes a mistake, you can't have experienced people who regularly make good decisions not make decisions anymore. I think there's this sort of this idea, well, there's been a mistake made, we must do something, right? We have to change something. And the fact is, there's a lot of moving parts and mistakes will happen, and we need to allow for that as best we can. We can do the best we can, but just because we're going to change something doesn't mean we're going to get better, or could create a whole new set of problems. Usually at this point when I talk about decentralized, I have the students play a quick game of telephone, where you whisper something next to you and they whisper something next to you and so forth. I said, that's what happens at the chain of command when people send things up the chain of command for review and approval and all of that. It's just like a game of telephone, things get moved. And sometimes people have their own agenda, their own axe to grind, so they put a twist on the message on purpose, a small little twist, but it sort of changes things, and the message that started wasn't the message that got up the chain. So you see those kind of things happen on I think it's a pretty regular basis, actually. All right, so just the fact Phil was talking about some of the things we need to think about, centralized versus decentralized. And again, these are some of the standards the Roman army used. And this guy down here in his armor, right, they were one of the first armies to have standardized armor, standardized weapons, and so forth. So everybody brings the same thing to the party. Scalar chain is a term we use not as much in management anymore. By that, Fayol met. It's alignment authority from the top management to the lowest ranks, right? Everybody knows who their boss are. They know who works for who, and they know who they should be taking orders from. Right? And communication should follow this chain. You really shouldn't jump the chain unless it's an emergency situation. And some cultures are different than that. And in the U.S., we're kind of comfortable with jumping the chain if it's no big deal, right? But I know if you go to places like England and parts of Europe, right, it's a very big deal if you jump the chain. And certainly parts of the Far East. So it's somewhat cultural also. All right, order is the next of the 14. Order management should provide an orderly place for each individual. People and materials should be in the right place at the right time. So it's part of management jobs to organize the workforce, right? Or see that it's organized. They don't have to do the organization themselves. They have to see that it's organized. People should have a consistently organized place with which to work so that they can do a good job. Tools should be stored in the same place. The Japanese have the 7 S's, right, where they organize work areas and so forth. There's lots of good ways to do that. By the way, this picture on here is a picture of every night when the Roman army was on the move, they analyzed, this is in the best interest of TQM, they did post-action analysis, and they figured out they had some of their worst defeats at night when they're sleeping, because apparently Roman soldiers are a lot easier to kill when they're sleeping, not wearing their armor, than on the battlefield ready to fight. So they figured out that we need to protect ourselves better at night. So every night they would stop their march when they're moving across country and build a fort. Right? They would carry the fort with them, the posts and all of that, and they would dig ditches and build towers, and they'd put the fort, and then every night they built the same fort, just in a different location. So if it's a dark, stormy night and you can't get a lantern going because it's raining too hard and all that, you know exactly where your tent was because you were in the second row, the third tent back, and that's where you and your buddy slept or whatever. So it's exactly the same fort, built exactly the same way, night after night, just in a different location. They would march about 6 hours during the day, then they would stop and rebuild the fort every night. So they got quite good at it. And yes, of course, you and your group would build the same part of the fort every night, so you can literally do it with your eyes closed. So we get really good at it. And that's how they protected their army when they were on the march. So they were very difficult to take down while they were marching. And they used to practice this, by the way. Before they left on campaign, they would march out, build the fort, get out the next morning, tear it down, move it to a different spot, rebuild it, and they would do it day after day to practice, so everybody learned how to do it. So they were very disciplined in how they handled things and protected themselves. By the way, the big thing in the center, that's the general's tent, and there was special security around there, so nobody sneaks in and sticks a knife in them or something. All right, so we have scalar chain, which is a line of authority, and they have order, right? It's management's job to organize and keep organized the workplace so people have an orderly place to keep themselves and their things so they can get the work. Equity. Fayol said managers should be kind and fair to those below them, right? Back in the 1800s, managers should be kind and fair to those below them, right? And so even Roman generals would do this. Occasionally, they would share the plunder with their soldiers and so forth. They would get pretty excited about that. We're going to take this town, and they would divide it up by different sections, and then you could basically whatever you could steal. By the way, again, this is part of retention, right? You can't make your army and your workforce better if you don't retain your workers. So treating people fairly below you is part of retention. Some of you guys will like this. So here we go. Stability and tenure personnel, right? So that's what Fayol was getting to, was that we need to have a stable workforce. High employee turnover is terribly inefficient. Time is needed for employees to adapt their work and to perform it effectively. So they got to have time to learn. They got to have time to get better at their work. Stability of tenure promotes loyalty to the organization. We have people who've been here a long time that tend to be more loyal. The Romans were one of the first armies to use medics. These Roman soldiers are well trained. They've been there for years. They're highly trained and skilled. So they would, we don't want them to get one cut and have an infection and die. So they brought Greek medics with them, and they knew how to, things like cauterize wounds and that type of thing. So they knew how to stitch people up and fix them and help prevent infection and so forth. Right. So they're pretty good at it. And then at the end of it was the golden rainbow, was your pot of retirement money, which whatever that was, and usually a farm. They would ship them to places they wanted to settle, and they would give you free land and stuff. So the Romans were very big on tenure of personnel, keeping the Roman armies. And by the way, if you didn't know, they all had a tattoo. Well, it was a branding, I think, not a tattoo, but a branding, right? That branded you in the army. So if they knew what unit you were in, so they knew if you deserted or not, they could find you at some point. So interesting how they had a lot of thoughts we still use and still teach in management, but this was stuff 1,000 years ago in the Roman army, which is, one of the most heartless organizations ever put together. But they took decent care of their own people, and they regularly beat opponents 3 and 5 times their size. So it's kind of amazing how they did that. And part of the tenure of personnel, physical endurance was critical in this style of combat, right? So they used to go on forced marches all the time. Imagine this. You pack up 80 to 100 pounds and go march 24 miles in 5 hours. Everybody, officers, everybody. And they used to do that. Even in peacetime, they go out, 3 times a month here. They do this. So every 10 days, you're going to pack it up and go for a little walk today, right? So they spent a lot of time learning how to move fast so they could get to trouble spots quickly. So this guy's carrying all kinds of stuff. He's got his shield. He's got his canteen. His helmet's in his lap here. He's carrying his pilums, which are spears, which were pretty high-tech for their day. And so they would basically whip their army into shape and keep them into shape so they're ready to go at any given time. It's kind of like the way we do consistent training at work, I guess. That was their idea of it. One of his last, I think the second last thing of his principles of management was initiative, right? If employees are allowed to create and carry out plans, they will exert higher levels of effort. So that's Fayol talking, right? And so the Romans did things like the first person to scale a city wall was given a golden crown. It was literally a golden crown. Or if you saved a fellow soldier, clearly saved somebody's life in combat, you got a crown. I think that was a crown of some type of plant material woven. I forget what they called it. But it was a special crown, and it was deemed to be a really big honor to wear one because you saved one of your buddies. So they showed lots of initiative in problem solving. They showed lots of initiative in how they were successful in the field. I put this picture, if you didn't know, when they used to fight the Carthaginian wars, Carthaginians were great sailors, the Romans mediocre at best. So the Carthaginians were winning all the sea battles, but the Romans would win the land battles. So the Romans said, well, if we can't win sea battles and we win land battles, let's turn a sea battle into a land battle. So they designed this thing. It's called a corvus. And a corvus is Latin for the crow, and they call it a crow's beak. This thing, if you can't see, has a big spike on the end. So if they'd sail up to an enemy ship, they'd cut the rope. This thing it's heavy. It would drop down the enemy ship, and this big spike would go right through their deck. And it would actually stake the two ships together, and with a gangplank in between them with sideboards. And then the army people would rush across it and fight the sailors on the other ship. So sailors on an enemy ship would have very little chance against armed Roman soldiers with their feet on solid wood. And so basically they were pretty smart. They would take a losing battle, a sea battle, turn it into a land battle, right, by locking the ships together, and they would win the battles that way, right? So very good problem-solving technique, very good ideas on how they were able to turn things around over and over again. By the way, just to show you how clever they were, not to bore you too much with Roman technology, but to show you how clever they were, this is their spear. It's called a pilum, and it works like this, right? This part is metal. The first 18, 20 inches are metal, and then the rest of it is wood. And the idea is when the bad guys are rushing you, you heave these at them. You just throw them all at one time. Because if you've ever been in a snowball fight, right, I can duck one snowball, but I can't duck 1,000, right? So they throw these things all at one time at the enemy, and they're either going to hit a person, they're going to hit a shield, or they're going to hit the ground, right? That's about all there is to hit. So if they hit the ground, they're designed to bend. The front part is soft metal, so if it hits the ground, it bends so that they can't pick them up and throw it back. If you're ever a kid and try to throw a wobbly stick that's bent, you can't throw it back because these things are deadly, so you don't want anybody picking them up and throwing them back at you. So it's made to bend. Now, if you hit a shield, this thing will go through and see the big barb on the end? It'll poke through the shield, but then the person can't get it out. If it goes through the shield but misses the guy, it'll hang in their shield. So now I got a big, long, 6-foot, heavy wooden spear sticking out of my shield in the middle of combat. I can't hold the thing up. So what do? I drop my shield. Now I'm semi-defenseless as I'm meeting the Roman army. So I'm in big, big trouble. And if it goes through the shield and it hits the guy, this thing the metal part is designed to be longer than my upper arm. So if it pokes through my shield, and if I'm behind that part of the shield, it'll still hit me. So and do serious damage. So they put a lot of technology in these things. And by the way, these 3 pins here, all of these were designed to break on contact, but one of them. So again, the thing is bent, so they can't get it out and they can't throw it back. So that's pretty sophisticated for its day. So these things would do a lot of damage. So every soldier carried 2 of these. So I throw 2 of these before the fighting even starts, and I can inflict a lot of casualties on the bad guys. And that's how they'd win battles against armies, again, 3 and 5 and 10 times their own size. That's some of the things they did. So they're quite clever in what they did. They spent a lot of time learning from their enemies what would work and what didn't work, and then they'd use it to their advantage. Basically, any advantage they could get, right, they would take. So that's initiative, right? People who have initiative get rewarded because it's understood that people who have their own ideas are try much harder at executing them than people just following. Right? And last on the list was esprit de corps. So even back then, Fayol was talking about, even at a mining company, we need to promote team spirit by building harmony within the organization. Right? So whatever that means to an organization, we should promote team spirit to build harmony. Certainly military organizations have tried to do that for a long time. By the way, here's a picture of one of those nasty pilums going through a standard shield. And you can see, even if you shield stopped it, if it's long enough to get to you, you're going to have a bad day. But organizations should spend time promoting team spirit. But again, you must have retention of personnel. You got to have consistent workforce so there's an organization that's been there a while so you can build up their morale. So I like this approach by Fayot. I thought he had a lot of good things in here, even as old as it is, right? A lot of companies, right? A lot of companies still don't do all of this kind of thing. It's not clear who's in charge. It's not clear who gives the orders. We give no thought to esprit de corps. Tenure of personnel might only be a select few, not a lot of people. Certainly there's not much order going on. Maybe the people don't feel any sense of equity. So there's lots of organizations that could, if they just did this, I think they would be better. So they're not even doing the fundamentals of 150 years ago correctly. Okay. Any thoughts or questions on that? I didn't want to make a little bit of a history lesson, but I think it's kind of neat to show that this stuff works because people are people, whether they're from 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago or the 1900s, right? This stuff tends to work over and over again. And there's a lot of repetitive things in management. When we think people get repackaged by consultants, they can resell the same idea. But quite frankly, some of these ideas work because people are still people. They might have slight cultural differences, but they tend to work across groups of people across time.
Yeah, I just had a quick question.
Yeah.
Just thinking about all of us as advisors and things working for different insurance carriers. The insurance carriers say follow these principles, but then when they allow us to, sell their products, they give us 1099s and then give us the ability to do in some ways whatever we want. So we don't have to follow all of their rules and regulations because we're somewhat self-employed. So it kind of, I think, disrupts what their main goal may be. So like on building the bridge, yes. They have that great idea to build the bridge, but then they say you guys are 1099. So, if you show up, that would be great, but we can't tell you to show up. So you would say get 1,000 good Samaritans that would show up to participate, but the other 40,000 would look at the other 39,000 and say, you guys are stupid to do that.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's not the way Caesar did it, right?
Yeah.
Pretty sure everybody showed up, right? They have people to make sure that happens. Sometimes we use, organizations will use consultants / contract help for a number of reasons. One, because you don't have to follow the rules. So we need things done a special way with its own set of rules. And even the Roman army used troops from territories they had conquered or territories that weren't part of Rome yet, and they used them as particularly their cavalry because it was a special mission and they were especially good at it. So they relied on them quite heavily sometimes, even though they weren't actually Romans, right? So it's okay to go and get help when you need it. And often it's because there was a special need and a special competency you don't have. Now, you said, they don't have to follow the same rules to people with the 1099s as the workers, right? And that's true. So you got to make sure the workers see the benefits that they're getting. They have the long stability of tenure. They get the retirement plan. They get the 401k. They get the chances to be promoted, right? Even the 1099 people might get higher pay, but then nothing else, right? They don't get paid time off. They don't get this. They don't get that. And that's part of communication. You have to make it clear to the employees what the differences are in those rules are and the differences in the compensation, right? Like when I used to be a defense engineer, when we get a big contract, we'd eventually hire a bunch of contract engineers who always made more money than we did, but they didn't have paid time off. They didn't have a retirement plan. They didn't have any tenure there. They didn't have anything. As soon as the contract was finished or it got pulled, they were done. Thanks. Friday's your last day. Good luck. Right. So there was no stability of them. They were temporary help and they knew it. But that was all clear going in. I mean, I wasn't really jealous they made 30% more than me because I understood I got things they didn't. They didn't get health benefits, right? They didn't get any of that benefits. They were just contractors. So I think communication is part of that, making sure people understand their roles and that the roles are not the same, they're different, and here's why. Not that they're better, they're just different. I think that's probably part of it. Does that kind of address what you were getting at?
Yes.
But the organization itself needs rules to carry on because they have sort of a different mission they're doing. But if you're there as a contractor with a very defined mission and a short-term project, right, that's different, right? I understand what they are. And quite frankly, there's another reason we use contractors for making change sometimes, because change often ruffles people's feathers and causes some heartburn. So often companies will say, well, it's not contractors, it's consultants. They'll say, well, the consultants recommended we do this. And so we're going to do that. Or the consultants say we have to get rid of 8% of our workforce if we're going to survive financially, and we can all go, the rest of us that can go on with our jobs. Therefore, the consultants are going to decide which 8% of us need to go. And so no matter how hated the consultants are, they can go away at some point, and management can go back to managing, and they don't have to be the lightning rod for taking all the heat, right? And that certainly has happened a fair amount of time, and that's sort of a tried and true approach you do when you got to do some unpopular changes. You bring in consultants, have them recommend it, and then they actually lay out what the changes are, and then they take the heat for it, and they get paid for it, and they go home. And if you want to see that work in a movie, there's a movie called Office Space where that's exactly what happened. It's a comedy. They hire these two consultants named Bob and Bob, and they come in and recommend changes to this company. And basically the company then does exactly what they say, and they get rid of a bunch of people. But it's a pretty funny movie, Office Space. But it's a good question. That's some of the uses of consultants and contractors. Usually we hire consultants in because they have skills that we don't have in our organization, or sometimes it's just more work, right? We've got a surge of work that we need to do. Like every IT department was flooded in 1999 trying to get ready for Y2K, so there was a lot of contract IT work being done by India, right? And that really started the big surge of Indian IT contract companies because of the Y2K threat. So there's different reasons you can use consultants, but that's part of it. Either technical expertise and experience, or it's just a temporary surge of work that we don't want to hire full-time people for. All right, good. Any comments, questions, observations? Right. Again, as I look at management theory through the years, right, I'm kind of impressed how things change, but how things stay the same. The culture differs. The politics differ, but basically deep down inside, people are people, and the way you handle them has certainly lots of historical of things through the ages how we handle them.
Do you find any of these more important than the other ones?
Good question. Sometimes the vision of work isn't as important. It depends on the work. But the work is specialized. It certainly needs to be. If the work is general, not as much. Sometimes discipline is vital because of the work itself. Sometimes not so much. So at a college, a university environment, believe me, faculty doesn't have much discipline, right? We're supposed to have these certain specific things on our syllabi for our classes. Nobody checks. Right? It may or may not be there because quite frankly, it's not that big a deal if it's not there, right? It can be addressed later or something like that. Versus when I worked in defense, right? You better believe there was strong discipline on how to document things, security requirements, right? It really comes down to what your priorities are, what's super important. So I would say that's sort of situational based, but all these have some measure of importance in an organization. It just depends what your organization's about, what they're trying to do. That's a good question. I think, but if you don't have stability of personnel, right, then the rest doesn't matter, right? If I don't see the same people when I come into work on most days, there's nothing I can do because tomorrow it'll be new people, and the next day it'll be new people, and the next day it'll be new people. So it really doesn't matter what I do because tomorrow will be different people. So there's no sense of training people, bringing them into scope, unity of equity, order, trying to get them to have some initiative. None of that works if I don't have the same faces there day to day, or mostly the same faces. Right. So that's probably the big one, right? I can't imagine how these guys run these like Little Caesar pizza places, and they have people coming and going like crazy. I know the process is designed to be learned in minutes and all that, but that must be very difficult on the shift supervisors to deal with constantly new people all the time. It's got to be a huge challenge.
Terry has an example along those lines.
Yeah.
How's retention at your company, Terry?
We have some real long-term people, but we are constantly replacing 30 out of 200. This year we were hiring every week new people, and of course we have a massive training and safety challenge when you hire new people, and your long-term success really does in this industry depend on keeping your people as long as you can. It's one of the reasons I'm so interested in fixing the healthcare problem, because if we could offer healthcare at no cost to our employees like we did in the 80s, we would be absolutely ahead of the pack, and we would be able to keep people like crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you're probably right. When you keep seeing new faces, it's hard to move forward, right? You're just trying to get them to learn how to stand in line and do the basics. You're constantly trying to hold back the flood of chaos at that point.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, in this industry, they get hurt.
Yeah.
Because the team that knows each other stays safe a lot better.
Uh-huh.
And if they're not getting hurt, they're making huge, costly mistakes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It's a big challenge.
I understand.
Lee, and in the Roman days, wouldn't that turnover be the same because of the battles, the amount of people that got killed, and then, the lifespan was only 45. So wouldn't they have dealt with the same situations every day?
Well, first of all, they brought them in when they were 16, so they were out by the time they were 36, right? So that helped. But they would, most of the soldiers don't spend time fighting battles. They're just maintaining the peace. So they didn't have the casualty rate you might think they would have. I mean, there were some historic battles, no doubt, where they would lose 10, 20, 30,000 people, but those were rare, right? That most of the battles they won, and when they won a battle, they didn't take that nearly so many casualties, and they would fill those in. They would sprinkle replacements into those, or they wouldn't. Sometimes the Legion just got smaller. So you have the same number of people. It was just 15% smaller or something after a couple major battles or major campaign. So it still had the same heart and soul to it, just somewhat smaller numbers, and not slightly smaller, but somewhat smaller numbers. But then those people would be there a long time. But then when they would occasionally, they would sprinkle them in with replacements, bring in a bunch of kids and sort of backfill a place so the veterans could train them. So the main thing was the people they were fighting were generally amateurs. They would come out and fight in the summer and then go back, and they're like Vikings, right? Go out and tend their fields in the spring and the fall and come fight in the summer. And there was no comparison between the skill level of those two groups. So they were able to win a lot of battles that way. So, and they generally kept those people in their army for a long time. So, and they would, okay, I mean, you could get mustered out or some whole units got disbanded, that kind of thing. It all depended on where you were and what the needs were, what they were doing. But certainly they were big on discipline and making sure everybody did what they were told when they were told, and all the jobs got done. But they had a heck of a career, right? They had a heck of a run at it for 800 years. They basically took on all comers. And it was amazing the amount of morale the nation had in the army. If the army lost a big battle and got wiped out, they just make a new one. They said, we lost that battle. We need to make a new battle. We need to make a new army. And they make a new army and go out and beat up on Hannibal or whoever was attacking them. And they figure out why they lost the last one or why the Carthaginian ships sunk their ships. And they just redesign the battle and figure out a way to win it. And they go back at it. So they had this long-term view that we didn't lose the war. They're down. We lost the battle. As long as we keep fighting, we'll win the war. So they had this big belief in themselves as coming out on top in the long run. And it generally worked out for them. I would say, I think there's another slide down here. Yeah, so some of the limitations of this theory, certainly Fayol based it on his personal experiences. He gets chided for being in a sort of a manufacturing, extraction, mining industry. It's nothing like working at Google or Apple or someplace like that. So there's significant differences to some of the days work companies. Although again, right, these 14 theories hold a lot of water with me. If a lot of companies did this and from an organizational standpoint, they would be okay. One of his short-sighting is he doesn't talk about a learning organization, although the Romans were big on that. So, for instance, when Hannibal attacked with his elephants, right, the Romans had to learn how to defeat elephants in battle because they were terrifying, and the guys had never seen them before, and they really scared everybody. So the Romans had to. Here was a problem. The Romans just treated it as a problem to be solved. By the way they did it was two things. The Roman general, was it Scipius, who attacked Carthage in Africa? He bought elephants, brought them to the army, he put them in corrals, and he made the whole army go down there and spend time with them. They would feed them, they would watch them, they would see the guys ride around on them. They would learn that, no, they don't shoot lightning bolts from their eyes. They do have this weird thing sticking out of their face they can pick things up with, but if it can't reach you, it can't touch you, or it can't hurt you. So they basically got them used to being around elephants. They also learned a few things like elephants are terrified of the smell of blood. So right before the battle, they slaughtered a couple horses to get a lot of blood in the area that would make the elephants not listen to their their drivers and sort of freak them out, and so they'd be less effective in combat. So in true Roman fashion, they just took the problem as it was, steered at it head on, figured out what they needed to do to solve it and solve it. So they were quite the learning organization, and Fayol doesn't address that organizations need to learn, need to get better. But to his defense, he said, hey, I just laid down these 14 rules. I'm not saying I'm the be-all, end-all. Other people should build on this. So I do think having a learning organization is very important. I think HR's role in an organization getting better is vital. I tell my students this all the time. If you don't believe me, I said, go find somebody who used to work at Blockbuster, right? Organizations need to get better, and they need to get smarter and learn how to do things in new and better ways. And certainly the business journals are full of stories of organizations that didn't keep up and aren't around anymore. All right. A couple of more stories from the history of management thought I wanted to go through. Kind of breeze through this next writing. One of the first American we think of as being big on, this file's opening up. Being big on management thought was a guy named Frederick W. Taylor around the turn of the century. And you may or may not have heard the term. He coined the term scientific management because management was thought to be a little wishy-washy or a little psychology bearing. So he used scientific management, which means we're going to prove things. So it carried more weight in its day of being a good way to dissolve things. He was very big on operations, redesigning work process to increase efficiency. So not so much in managing large group of people, but he was more of an operations guy on learning how to do things faster. Basically, he applied the scientific principle. He said, look, we're going to, if work is important, we're going to do this. We're going to study the way workers perform their tasks, gather all information possessed by the workers, then we're going to run experiments, and we're going to find the best way to do a certain task. Once we figure out the best way to do that, which includes talking to the workers, then we're going to jump down to principle 2. We're going to codify it. We're going to record it, right? This reminds me of the hospitals, right? We have a lot of process to follow when you're handling information on patients, how they handle drugs, what the RNs are doing, and so forth, right? So they come up with a best practice for a policy. Number 2, they write that down into written rules and standard operating procedures. Number 3, they carefully select workers to ensure they possess the skills and abilities that match the needs of the task. So if I got somebody given syringes of powerful narcotics, right, it better be a trained RN who's doing that, or a doctor, right? And then principle number 4, we're going to establish a fair and acceptable level of performance for a task, and then develop a pay system that provides a higher reward for performance above an acceptable level. So he was big in the bonuses. We're going to set a standard rate for the workers to do, and once they get above that, right, we'll have a bonus factor thrown in for them as long as they're meeting the other requirements like quality and such. So he gets credit for sort of interesting American business into management and having organized methods of making process improvements and making better. And quite frankly, he put up big numbers. He turned organizations around. He made them not, a lot of places, not 5 or 10% more efficient, but 100 and 200 more percent efficient. So he put up huge numbers, including he straightened out the railroads during World War I. When the country had to ship a lot of stuff, suddenly the railroads came to Congress and said, hey, we need to jack our rates up by, I think it was 200%, because we're shipping all this war material. And Congress said, no, we can't afford to pay that. So they sent, we're going to send you this guy, Frederick Taylor, and he's going to tell you guys how to run your railroads more efficiently so you don't have to jack up rates. And that's exactly what happened. And they shipped much more material with the same amount of resources and didn't raise the rates in the government. So basically they were trying to gouge the government because they knew they had them over a barrel, and it didn't work. Taylor went in there and sorted it out. So that's Frederick W. Taylor with scientific management. Also interesting is in 1800s in Germany, a German sociology professor named Max Weber, people call him Weber all the time, but he's German, so it's Weber. He had how you should run a bureaucracy. Now, a bureaucracy gets a bad name, certainly. There's a lot of baggage attached to that word. But if you think bureaucracy is bad, try living in a world without them, right? I can remember, I used to use the example of Baghdad right after Gulf War I, where it was just sort of open chaos on things going on. There's no police force, there's no traffic lights, nobody's keeping the power on, right? Things are just chaos, right? So Weber had some rules for a bureaucracy, things like authority, right? Authority is the legitimate power to hold people accountable for their actions. Authority gives managers the legal right to have direction and control over the subordinates. So when you get a job in an organization, I'm sorry, I skipped the first line. A manager's authority derives from the position he holds in an organization. So when someone has a title, that gives them authority, but once they leave that spot, they no longer have the authority, right? Just like in our country, the military listens to the president, we don't listen to ex-presidents, right? It's the same kind of thing. Because remember, he's coming from a world where there's the royals and the non-royals, there's the nobles, the non-nobles, and there's different classes of people. And so he said, no, none of that matters. It's who your boss is and where they are in the org chart. That's who you have to listen to, which probably didn't sit real well with certain people. Principle number 2, in a bureaucracy, Weber believed people should occupy positions based on their performance rather than social standing or personal context. Again, we're going to give the job to the best people, right? Not a world-shattering thought, but certainly something that's not the same. Even in certain lesser developed countries around the world, that's not always who gets the job. It's the contacts and the relatives and that type of thing. So we're going to work to put the best people in the best jobs. Principle 3 argued each person's formal authority and task responsibility and its relations with other positions, organizations should be clearly defined. So he's arguing for a org chart and a description that says what each person and organization can and can't do. So he's out to clearly define roles and responsibilities, which certainly helps a lot in an organization. Principle 4 is related to that. Weber stated that the exercise authority effectively in an organization, positions should be arranged hierarchically, right? So there we have a org chart, right? So we know who works for whom and who's in your group and who's in the other group, so we know where everybody is in the organization. I've seen small organizations where not necessarily the case. I think I've seen construction companies, Terry, that don't really have an org chart, right? And it's not always clear who's in charge, who's calling the shots, and so forth, right? It comes with being flexible, but it's also kind of confusing for people caught up in that. And that's not uncommon in smaller organizations. Principle 5, Weber argued it's very important for managers to create a well-defined system of rules, SOPs, and norms so they can effectively control behavior in organizations. So there we are. We have rules, we have SOPs, and we're going to follow them. We're going to have discipline here. Right? People don't get to decide how they do a job. They don't get to willy-nilly do things differently. We're going to spell things out over and over again. I would say that at some point Weber acknowledged this is not an exciting place to work with these organizations. It's not necessarily interesting. It sort of holds back on innovation, but it's a good way to efficiently do repeated tasks fairly and equitably over and over again through the long haul, right? That was the idea of a bureaucracy. To be fair, right? To do things repeatedly in an efficient manner so we don't reinvent the wheel. And it doesn't matter who your last name is, what college you went to, what town you're from. We're going to treat people the same, and it's based on how they stack up in the organization based on their own skills. So there were some good thoughts in how we described the bureaucracy, I think. And so it doesn't, and that's where the term comes from. So it's got a lot of negative association with it, certainly these days, but it's not bad in what he was setting out to do. Although he did admit it's not very flexible. It's not flexible at all, and it's not a lot of fun to work in. So that's a little background. This is from like the early 1800s. Real quickly, Mary Parker Follett it's Follett, I think they pronounce. She's the late 1800s. She was a woman who wrote about management, so she didn't get published because, what would women know about management? But she argued that, Follett argued that because workers know the most about their jobs, they should be involved in job analysis, and managers should allow them to participate in the work development process. So Taylor was actually a supporter of that from lower levels, but not at higher levels. So she believed basically it should be more like today's modern management with less rigid structure, right? Let people do what they're comfortable at doing, let them take the ball and run with it, and don't hold people back so much, which was very, very radical for its day and really didn't get published until almost after World War II, or didn't get widely published because it was just thought to be too far out there, too hippy-dippy. But this is certainly the way a lot of companies in Silicon Valley operate today. The fast-moving high-tech tend to operate this way because they don't really have many hourly people. The workers tend to be more trained, and they have to be very fast. So they're much more interested in speed than they are in repeatability of consistency of the efforts that they do. So she's an interesting example of somebody who's literally 100 years ahead of her time. And the last thing we're going to talk about in terms of the history of management is the Hawthorne studies. Many of you have probably heard of this. This was they changed the lighting in the factory. A lot of people, it's been my experience, don't really understand what some of the takeaways from this were. and I know I'm sure some of the HR people have been studied this test. Basically, this is the company called Western Electric. The Hawthorne studies, because it was at a Hawthorne Works, the name of the facilities. It was Western Electric in Chicago, I think. And what they were doing was they made industrial lighting. So the big heavy lights that they light up factories with. So what they wanted to do was do a test that showed that more lighting increased worker output. Better lights in your workspace would increase worker output. So that's what they were trying to test. So the researchers grabbed about 6 or 8 of the young ladies assembling product, and they put them into a small room with a supervisor, and they were able to adjust the light levels. And when they made the lights brighter, output went up. When they made the lights brighter again, output went up again, which was great. And so just to be sure, they turned the lights down lower, thinking output was going to go down, but output went up. And so they turned the lights down lower some more, and output went up again. Well, something's going on here, and it's certainly not the lights. They didn't know what to do, so they ended up getting a hold of, eventually, this guy, Elton May. I think it's Elton Mayo, actually. I think that's a typo. It's Elton Mayo, M-A-Y-O. He was a Harvard psychologist who came in. They said, this is not an engineering thing. This is like a psychology thing. Try to figure out what's going on. And what he figured out was down here, because the workers were enjoying special attention from their supervisor, they were willing to cooperate. And every time they sensed the change in the environment, they assumed the company wanted more output from them, so they cranked up their output because it would make their supervisor look good and it would continue the experiment, and they liked this work environment. They weren't on a huge factory, dirty floor, getting treated one of many. They got this special consideration in the small lab with their own little supervisor who was nice to them, unlike their normal supervisor, so they wanted to go on. So they're willing to work harder to make their supervisor look good, so they got to keep doing the experiment. So what we've learned here is that people aren't machines, and people have morale. There's an organizational culture, and it affects what people do, and it can affect their output and their quality by huge, huge numbers. So organizations need to start paying more attention to their surroundings, to their managers need to pay attention to the surroundings, to the work environment, and so forth. And this is what started the whole human relations movement about treating your workers differently, treating their workers like people, making sure they're satisfied in their jobs and those type things, because it very much affects their output. So that's basically what the Hawthorne effect was all about, was learning that workers, big surprise, they're people, they have morale, they have feelings, and it affects their output. So you need to address those issues. As sticky as they may be, it's still important for managers to get a handle on that. So that's what people are talking about when they refer to the Hawthorne experiments. That's been studied through the years, but it's certainly that's probably the seminal of all management studies there, and it I don't know, sort of opened up a whole field of the human relations movement that we need to know what the employees are thinking and feeling to try to address those issues so we get better work out of them, right? Which seems to hold water today. I know still a lot of companies are doing employee surveys, taking the temperature, employee morale. Certainly health benefits is part of that. I know this is a big deal in the healthcare industry, where they're looking at workers' job satisfaction. It affects retention. It affects a lot of things. And it's really opened up a huge can of worms for management and how they deal with workforces. And it's I don't know, it's a huge deal this day, in my opinion. Anybody know of anybody doing experiments, trying to increase morale in organizations they've been talking to? Like retention bonuses, anything like that?
We use a combination of appreciation techniques, but not bonuses. Bonuses are, I don't know. We don't really, we have bonuses, but they're based on performance, not necessarily for increasing job satisfaction.
Okay, but it's based on performance. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
I actually just came from an awards ceremony last week. We had the Oregon's healthiest employers, and it's just really interesting the stuff that they're doing to think outside the box. Just having masseuse come in and so just things like that to kind of reward their employees for doing a good job. And it's not it's not monetary, but it definitely, a lot of the people that won the awards, they had the employees come up with the head of the business. And they would just tell stories about how it changed things just so dramatically, just so drastically overnight, just by having fun things, for these guys when they're coming in every day.
All right. Yeah, it's amazing. Sometimes paying attention rewards is like the easiest thing you can do, right? You can really, really do it. Helpful. Sort of on the flip side, we had a student whose Dad worked for a large chicken processing company. I won't say which one. So they decided to show the works, show their appreciation to their employees. So they cooked them a dinner where all the upper level managers cooked. And these are the guys who go out in the chicken coops and scoop up chickens at 4 o'clock in the morning and load them on the trucks and all that. So the very lowest hourly workers were invited to this dinner that the bosses were going to cook for them. And as a joke, I said to my student, don't tell me they served them chicken. And she said, well, actually they did. And some of them were pretty upset about it. I said, are you kidding me? Guys who handle chickens all day long, and they know the company probably spends less than $1 per chicken. So the company's going to show them how much they appreciate them by serving them the cheapest food possible, by the one thing they're sick of handling all day, all month, all year long. And they serve them chicken at this thing when they could have just got them some steaks and they would have really appreciated it. But no, they served them chicken. She goes, yeah, my dad didn't really understand why they were upset. I can guess why they were upset. I mean, I said it as a joke, but so the point is you can do it wrong, right? You can do it wrong and upset people. I've seen companies spend a lot of money on things for employees when employees would tell me they would have, but the employees don't use it. Like, we're going to create a big workout center for you, spend $500,000 on a workout center, but the employees don't use it. Say, well, I would have rather had that money in my paycheck, right? So it's always give and take. It's always a tough one. To try to find something that everybody wants is always a challenge. It's really hard to please all the people all the time, I think. I'm trying to think of other things I've heard about that people do. Certainly asking
Alex, hey, Alex, how do you assess the performance of the children in your house?
Their listening skills are leave a little bit to be desired. I hope you don't mind his auditing the course.
He'll get a bill.
Yeah.
Thinking while you were talking, this was one of my employee perks is I work at home, and this is my cutest coworker.
Yeah. There you go. I used to try to grade people's room cleaning ability. People in my house would tell me their room is clean, and I would go in there and there's stuff just thrown everywhere. I said, okay, so when you call for a room inspection to tell me your room is clean, for everything we find out, it's going to be one push-up, right? These are like 12-year-old boys. One push-up, right? And we're going to have you do that so you get some exercise by not cleaning your room properly. And just so you don't complain, I'll do them with you, right? And that only lasted like 2 weeks. I just couldn't make that stick for some reason. There just wasn't any organizational discipline. So you try things for discipline reasons, but it's always a challenge. All right, so I kind of give you a look at the Hawthorne look. I don't really want to go into those guys. That was Gantt. Gantt, if you guys all seen Gantt charts, right? You've seen these charts. These are Gantt charts. Gantt was a guy who was a friend of Frederick W. Taylor. He's really a disciple of his, and he really liked the idea of a visual display of work, because what gets measured gets improved. So we're going to show people we're tracking their work, that we're interested in all that, and they're more likely to get their work done on time just because they know someone is tracking it and watching it. It's been my experience that's absolutely true. When I worked in a factory as a quality engineer, we started posting quality data just to keep track of it, and the quality defects went down by 1/3 just because we were posting the data in the work area because they knew someone was watching, and not watching as we're out to get you. We were just posting it. There were no pluses and minuses, no rewards, no penalties or anything, and the results had stayed the same for quite a while in terms of quality. But as soon as we started posting the area, they went down by 1/3. I mean, I had to ask the supervisor what was going on. She goes, "Oh, because you demonstrate the quality matters, so they're paying more attention now." So it is true that what gets measured gets improved. And so I suppose if you could figure out how to make that stick somewhat with healthcare expenses and all that, and people might pay more attention to it. All right. Back to the web page. All right, the last topic we're going to cover tonight is organizational culture, right? And that's going to come into play when we start talking about organizational change. Real quickly, we're going to talk about the manager's personality and their cultures. Let me close this. All right, so we're going to talk about values, attitudes, and culture, and the manager as a person. In class, we look at personality traits a little bit, and we certainly got to think about people we're dealing with, both subordinates and managers. I mean, managers' personalities have been shown to influence their behavior a lot. Unfortunately, no single trait is right or wrong for being an effective manager. A little later, I'll define emotional intelligence. Higher scores of emotional intelligence have shown to help management and people moving up higher in their careers, but really different personality traits have not. In terms of personality traits, usually we talk about the Big Five personality model: extroversion, negative affectivity, agreeableness, conscientiousness, openness to experience. I'll quickly define those. Extrovertness isn't just outgoing, but experience positive emotions and moods and feel good about oneself and the rest of the world. So you're just sort of positive about the things about you is the definition of extrovert, not so much about enjoying social interaction. Negative affectivity is your Eeyore, right? You have lots of negative gloom and doom about how things are going to go. You know, this glass is not half full, it's half empty, and it's about half empty and about to be spilled kind of a person, right? So we can measure negative affectivity, and of course, as you would think, those people with that high negative affectivity don't tend to be the greatest managers. Agreeableness, the tendency to get along well with others. People high in agreeableness tend to be, they're likable. They want others to like them. If they're low in agreeableness, then they might be distrustful and unsympathetic. But studies have shown that very high score of agreeableness doesn't really make you a good manager, because it makes you a good yes man, right? But makes you a good manager is to be somewhere in the middle. You have to be able to disagree and be uncooperative once in a while when people are trying to get you to do the wrong things. So there is a certain amount of disagreeableness, right? I think of it as having a backbone, right? That's required in management, I think, to be a good manager and to make things happen. Remember, when we talk about change, there's always people that resist change. And if you want to be liked by everybody, you're never going to be able to make an organization change, I guarantee you. So you're going to have to be able to push a little bit. Conscientiousness, right? Tendency to be careful, scrupulous, and preserving. I remember years ago reading a study about how people view where they work. And one of the highest things they use to rate their organization is when somebody gives me some work, when it comes to me, is it complete and is it correct? So I can do my thing to it and pass it on to the next person. If it's complete and correct, I think of my organization as, man, I'm part of a well-oiled machine. We know what the heck we're doing. If it comes to me not complete and not correct, I'm thinking I work with a bunch of bozos. We barely know what's going on here, right? That's the way, surprisingly so, a lot of people view their organization from their little slice of the pie, right? So interesting how that's how people judge their company. When it's the work that comes to them. Is it complete and is it correct? I found that a very interesting study, and I think it's probably, I mean, it carries a lot of weight with me. I think that's probably true. People judge their organization by their boss and by the work, how it comes to them. Openness to experience is another good one. It tends to be original, broad interest, wide range of stimuli. So people who move up in management tend to try lots of different things. They're not afraid to take risk and try new things and learn new things. And that's certainly part of being entrepreneurial in business, jumping into new things and all of that. Tom and I both have that we're both career changers, right? Anybody who's a career changer has made big changes, and they must be open to new experiences and so forth. Internal locus and external locus of control. Most of you probably have a handle on these terms, right? Internal is I'm responsible for my own fate. I may not be able to control whether I get laid off or not, but how do I deal with getting laid off and what's my response to that? I can control. External locus control is, the world's out to get me, the man's out to get me, there's nothing I can do. Right? I teach this to my undergrad students all the time. Don't fall into that external locus of control trap, right? I mean, we all have choices to make, and there's certain things we can and can't do, but we got to learn how to deal with the ones that we can deal with. Other personality traits are things like self-achievement and self-esteem and need for achievement. Need for achievement is not from others. It's extent with an individual has a strong desire to perform challenging tasks to meet personal standards, right? It's their own standards. They want to learn how to do new things. It gives them a really good feeling. Like I know a retired guy who he became a licensed electrical contractor, never did a circuit and never built anything in his life. Then he became a certified sushi chef, and now he's learning how to play the guitar, right? This is a busy, busy guy who's gathered credentials like crazy because of his need for achievement. Right? He'll probably live to be 120. Need for affiliation, a lot of employees feel that. They're concerned about establishing and maintaining good interpersonal relationships. They like being liked. They like to get along with those about them. Sometimes you'll see employees resist being promoted or moved up or being singled out because of this. They want to stay friends with their friends and their cohort at work and all that. They don't want to. They don't want to be singled out because they're afraid it'll separate them from the herd. That's in fact what they fear most. And some people are the opposite. They have this need for power. Not that they're greedy or aggressive, but they like to make decisions. They like to influence others. They like to have an impact in the organization around them. I don't want to get into the values and attitudes too much, but just understand that everybody makes decisions based on their personal backgrounds, where they are in terms of their attitudes and emotions and moods, and it affects their decision making quite a bit. And it's not that when I was young, I had to learn it's everybody's a product of their experiences. So if you were in their shoes, you would probably feel and act the same way. So figuring out where people are coming from is quite a skill, and you have to go in there with a sort of a blank sheet on why is this person acting the way they are. Right? And most organizations have their norms, right? Informal rules of conduct for behaviors, and we generally learn those from other people in the organization. I'm not really going to get into attitudes, but a lot of people work about attitudes, job satisfaction. There's things that affect our job satisfaction that have very little to do with pay. It has to do with how we're being treated, the work we do. Do I have another slide on that? No, I don't. But it's things like how our work influences others. Do we get to show initiative? Do we get to plan some of our own work? How much control do we have of our work? And do we view our work as important, right? Even the person who paints the lines on the highway, which might be a really boring job, knows they have an extremely important job because those lines on the highway keep people from having head-on collisions, so they have a life and death job would be the way they see it. So everybody tends to find some valuable thing in their job. And if it wasn't valuable, why would they pay you to come to work? Organizational commitment is something we measure sometimes, but again, that's a collection of feeling and beliefs people have about their organization as a whole and how much they want to support it. Not just managers, but all the workers. All right, so I mentioned emotional intelligence and how that is a measure of some people's success. Well, not a measure, it's a determination of how far some people are going to go. So if you haven't familiar with this term, it's been really around since the early 90s a lot. Basic emotional intelligence is this: the ability to understand and manage, or some people will say control, your own moods and emotions. So you understand, I'm running out of patience and I'm about to go off on this guy, so I'm just going to leave and go get a cup of coffee or whatever it might be, right? So you understand and control your own emotions, and you understand the emotions of other people. So this person is upset over this issue. I think it's no big deal, but to them it's very important, so I need to treat it as very important because to them it's very important. I just can't sit here and poo-poo it because that'll only make them mad. Because I understand they think this is very important, so I need to deal with it that way, right? That's an example of using emotional intelligence to interact with somebody who's having a problem with something, right? So emotional intelligence, I understand and control my own emotions, and I understand the emotions of others, right? Politicians are typically very good at this, right? They understand what's going on. They control their own emotions, and they understand what's going on in the room and how to address the mood in the room by the people in the room. Right. Successful leaders tend to score very highly in this. A lot of people successful in the industry move up in organizations tend to. Some people do not. Some people either got there by technical expertise or they just got lucky. But many people are quite successful, tend to score very high in emotional intelligence because they can not just interact with the people around them, but understand them so they're able to get them to do what they want or get what they want from these people. So Daniel Goodman was the guy who wrote the book on emotional intelligence, if you want to know more about that. But it's a very useful thing. I remember when I first started teaching at the University of Lynchburg, I was at lunch with some college faculty, and one guy pulled out that book, and he said, "Oh, you're in management?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You ever heard of this book?" And I said, "Yeah, I have." He said, "My wife gave me this, and she told me to read it." Now, I just met the guy, but he seemed like quite the bookish, quiet, nerdy, stereotypical professor type. I said, well, if your wife gives you a book about anything with the word emotion in the title and suggests you read it, yeah, I'm going, you should probably read it. But it's a really useful skill, and certainly one people can develop through practice, right? If you try, you can develop through practice. And dealing with people without emotional intelligence, right, is much more challenging. You have to exhibit more emotional intelligence dealing with those people. Anybody have any stories they want to add to emotional intelligence? People with or without? I always tell the students, I throw in the Sheldon Cooper, right, from Big Bang Theory, right, who's really, really smart, but he's not so high. He kind of controls his own emotions, but he has no clue about the emotions of intelligence of other people, right? So he has to, basically Penny is the seeing eye dog, right? He has to ask Penny or Leonard what people are thinking and feeling so he understands how to interact. Right, organizational culture is something we're going to get. We start talking about changing organizations. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but really, some people have a hard time getting a definition around it. So it's a shared set of beliefs, expectations, values, norms, and work routines that influence how members of an organization relate to one another and work together to achieve organizational goals. And I think of it as the personality of an organization. You know, we're really hard driving here. We're polite to each other here. It's better to be nice to people here than it is to be on time here, or the opposite, right? So, and I think it's interesting to me how organizations, even in the same industry, tend to vary. I mean, they can have very different organizational cultures. And you hear that from the people who've changed jobs. They'll say, oh, my old job, it was like this or it was like that. And so I think I always thought it was interesting to compare how particularly people in the same industry find very much different organizational cultures as they move around. So how could that be, right? Where does this come from? And the idea is it comes from a number of places. First, the values of the founder. They set the original organizational culture, right? We enforce that through socialization. We enforce that through ceremonies and rites. What gets rewarded, what doesn't? What do people get pats on the back for? What do people get in trouble for, right? And we pass these stories along historically through basically tribal knowledge, through stories and language. The experienced people telling the less experienced people, oh, you don't want to do that. There was this guy a couple years ago. He got his wings clipped because he did such and such or whatever, right? Or, no, don't worry about that rule. We break that rule all the time. It's fine, right? That's how organizational culture gets spread around. And if you're looking to change it, right, you got a big job ahead of you because this is the way an organization is used to working. These are ingrained behaviors and values, and it's going to take a while to undo it, a long while. And organizational socialization, right? That's a process where newcomers learn the organization. So if you're trying to change your organizational culture, often it's best to keep the newcomers away from the old timers because they'll teach them all the old ways, as opposed to you need time to teach them the new ways, whatever those might be. We mentioned rites and ceremonies. What gets rewarded gets repeated. So you need to be careful what you're paying attention to, what gets rewarded. Same thing with different rites of passage and so forth. And there's language and stories that passes along. All right, last slide. Oh, that's just a review slide. Right. So the big takeaways from this chapter are, right, people, including all managers, have personality traits, and the more we understand those, the better. We need to understand an organizational culture when we walk into it and how that gets directed, how that's controlled, how that gets passed along, right? And the more emotional intelligence we have around us and we have ourselves, the better it is to operate and work with others. Any thoughts, questions, comments on that? I was going to put a link in here to take a Big Five personality test, but actually there's a number of them out on the internet for free. So if you're interested to see how you score, right, there's any number of these tests that you can find on the internet for free. So someday at lunch, you want to pop out a 15-minute self-quiz, you can do that. You can kind of see how you stack up here in extroversion, negative affectivity, and so forth, right? And these are behaviors, right? These aren't values, so they can be trained through. You can learn to adjust these.
Hey Lee.
Yeah.
Robson here, and to everyone that's on the program today. There's something called Crystal Knows, and I've been kind of using it as a team personality test that's automatically pulled from LinkedIn and a couple other sources and aggregates this. So if anybody wants to shoot me an email or message me, I can pull your LinkedIn up account and kind of get your personality test. And I've been using it also with prospects and those that I'm having meetings with. Kind of an interesting input in how to communicate with people. It's been mildly successful with the few interviews I've had in the last few weeks using this service. So it's kind of cool. Yeah.
All right. Well,
so Robson, do you actually have them take it, or are there some of them you know well enough you think I'm going to answer it for them and see how I can use this to navigate the situation?
No, it's pulled off of LinkedIn and through some other sources, and it kind of spits it out in about 15, 20 seconds.
Really?
And it gives me a printout of how to engage with that individual from their personality test. And maybe the 20 people I've shown it to, I'd say it's 90% accurate.
There's enough information out there to pull that in, huh? That's interesting.
Well, I mean, it's easy and doesn't cost y'all anything. So I'll put my email address in there and just shoot me a link with your LinkedIn account, and I'd be curious to share it with you.
Yeah, why don't you send it to me and I'll forward it to the whole class, and anybody's interested can send it to you. I know I'm interested. I want to see what it says. I want to see if I can get information on LinkedIn to make a decent analysis. That's interesting. It never occurred to me someone would do that. Right.
Again,
Google, I'm sure
Crystal
Google knows more about
Knows.
me than the FBI, but yeah, that's interesting. Huh.
Crystal Knows somehow sounds kind of illegal, but
It's Crystal Node? Is that what it is?
oh, I thought you said nose.
It's Crystal Knows.
Crystal
Yeah, it's just not the way Tom's thinking it's spelled. It's actually what
Yeah, I know. You know, I lived in Detroit in the 80s, and there were some Crystal Nose things going on there, too, at the time. Interesting. Yes. Yeah. Send me the link. I'll send it to the whole class. I'm interested to see how that works. You got me really curious now. That sounds interesting. Okay. So that's about it for tonight. We've gone through these. So next class, let's go back and look at the Moodle page real quick. Okay. So I don't know why this keeps showing.
Lee, is that evaluation similar to the DISC? I guess there's lots of personality tests out there, but are you familiar with the DISC test?
Yes. Is it similar? Kind of, I guess would be the point, right? There's overlap in a lot of these things, but the Big Five personality test did the different factors we talked about tonight. DISC has to do somewhat with decision making, doesn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah.
But it does put, people in different categories, whether they're introvert or, extrovert, that sort of thing too.
Yeah.
Likes to work with numbers or not.
Yeah. And those aren't,
Myers-Briggs.
Any information is better than none, right?
Right.
Right. I remember the first time we did the Myers-Briggs. This is in the early '90s, right before the internet. And the guy passed out the form at this management training thing at work, and then everybody said, "Can I get a blank copy of this?" And the guy like, "Why do you guys want blank copies?" Like, we're going to give them to our spouses. That's why, right? We want to see how we match up. It's like, I see. I'm going to have to start bringing extras. Okay. All right. So the homework from tonight. By the way, I'm going to post this on YouTube, and I'll post a link up here. So if anybody wants to watch it again, or if any people aren't here for class, they can see it. So the homework for tonight is to find three topics we talked about tonight. Write a 1-page on each of those 3 topics. Put it together in 1 paper, not 3 papers, and submit it to this. So reflective narrative means you're going to reflect. You're not going to tell me the theory, but you're going to explain why you find it interesting, why you find it useful, why you find it total hogwash, whatever, right? And how it applies to your, and why you do that. Maybe hopefully it relates to your work somehow. So why you find it interesting and useful to know about. So everybody owes one of those papers, not till next week, right? And again, this is not a high-end essay paper with resources on it. This is just your thoughts on the topics. So you can bang those out at lunchtime. And again, a 1-page double-spaced on each topic, put them together in a 3-page paper, and submit it here into this folder. Okay. And then next week, we're going to have a very similar class. We'll talk about different topics, things like strategy planning, designing organizational structures, what the pluses and minuses are to different organizational structure, how organizational control works, things the effect in the global environment, and so forth. And then we have a small little place on that. And then the week after that, we're going to talk about, we're going to have you guys try to find some peer-reviewed articles on organizational change. Actually, I'm going to change this, not peer-reviewed articles, just talk about articles in organizational change. What's the difference? Peer-reviewed means they have to be in an academic journal that's been reviewed. And the problem with those are they take multiple years to get them through the editing cycle, through the review cycle, and so forth. When your field is changing so fast, we're gonna make it a non-peer-reviewed articles on things like Fortune magazine and the business literature and Wall Street Journal, those type things. So perfectly okay to use articles out of there. So we'll talk more about that next week. We'll also talk about. Go ahead.
Is that Lee? Is that David Contorno or David Chase that you're down below that?
I thought it was Cortona, but breaking down. Let me open it up and see. We'll know in a second here.
Okay.
The links to Chase.
Oh, it is to Chase. So that's what.
Oh,
it
I
is.
see. Okay.
Yep. It is. Yep. I had the wrong name there.
Got that.
I don't know where I got Cortona from.
Well, it probably was from his link and Robinson. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Chase right on there. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll correct that. Okay. Any questions? And then where's my Moodle? Yeah. Stop the share. All right. Everybody's back.
I have a question. Somewhere I think I read that you were referring to a voice thread.
Yeah, what that is, that's like an audio blog. I may or may not have you do that. We might do that about that article from David Chase, and I might not do that. I might just take that assignment out. So we'll talk more about that in a week or two.
Okay, I just didn't know what the voice thread was.
Yeah. Basically, that's a you know how a lot of online classes have blog. You sit there and you type out something, and then somebody else responds to it back and forth, right? Well, voice thread is a way you can do that with audio video, and so you don't have to sit there and just type through things. You can actually record it by having the camera look at you. And some people like that better because it's more of a stream of consciousness. You don't have to think so carefully about what you're writing. So like in my leadership class, I use it because as people talk about their own leadership styles, they tend to be more reflective that way. But I think I'm probably going to take that out of this class. It's probably not necessary. Tom and I are still planning exactly where we want to go with some of these things, and that allows us to be a little more flexible. And I think it helps us make the best class as we figure out what you guys are interested in the most. All right, there you go.
How would you classify his leadership style as EQ? There's a lot written on him. But.
Yeah, he certainly had a vision, and he was driven for that vision. And if you got in the way of that vision, well, I'm not here selling ice cream, right? So you would just get run over. On the other hand, he was shorter than he needed to be with people. You hear people talk about there were absolutely highly skilled people that would not work for Apple because they didn't want to deal with him and his short fuse of a temper. So his management, his ranting and raving held back the recruitment of talent of good people they might have had from the way I hear it. He certainly had the vision and drive to make things happen. When he left Apple, what happened? Nothing really, right? I mean, they didn't really come up with any new products. And when he returned is when they did iTunes and then iPods and then iPads and all of that. So he certainly was a huge force for innovation in the industry and at Apple itself. So you can't knock his results, but you can certainly have some comments on how he got about there.
Well, the product has certainly gone down since he's really left.
Yeah, I think so. I use a Samsung phone. My wife just got the dreaded second update on her, I don't know, she has an i7, I think, right? I'm like, oh boy, it won't be long now. My students, by the way, my undergrad students are horrified that I would make fun of iPhones. I might as well say bad things about Jesus. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I have an Android too.
Yeah, you just don't understand how bad I am talking about, right? And I'm like, so I just pour it on. They just start laughing. They don't know what to do.
It doesn't help that when you're in one of those lecture halls, you're surrounded by Macs. So.
Yeah. Oh, I give them business for that too. This is a business class. What are you bringing an artsy fartsy computer in here for? Oh yeah. Never to the freshmen. They would take me seriously. They'd be upset. By the time they're juniors or whatever, they can take a joke. So it's a small school like Lynchburg. We usually have them two or three times, so they get to know you after a while. So they loosen up a little, which is nice. They're pretty fun by the time they're juniors and seniors. Got to be careful of their little feelings when they're sophomores or freshmen. They're really easy. They're really easy to scare. I remember those days.
So Ashley, I was just going to ask you before we leave, you look a little bit like Vincent Price there in the dark background and all that. So have you ever used that armor or some of those blades and, as you manage employees?
They're talking to me? I don't manage people.
See, that's the answer.
Upset. All right.
I like the taxi cab driver response. Talking to me?
I barely manage myself, much less manage people. I get managed.
There you go.
All
right. Any other comments, questions? All right. Well, I'm certainly on email. I usually send out my cell phone if anybody needs to text me a quick question, although we don't have much due this week. But I'm looking forward to doing that, the crystal nose thing, as we called it, do the analysis on that, see how that works out. That's going to be interesting. All right. So it's good to meet everybody. I'll see you same time, same place next week. And we'll see what kind of Roman armor we can drag out for that one. And I'll post this video on YouTube if anybody wants to watch any part of this again. So everybody have a good night, and it's good meeting everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes, please.